Hi, this is Paul Metsa. You're watching Wall of Power TV. Celebrating Bob Dylan's 78th birthday this weekend, we have a very special piece of film that you will only see on this show. In 2007, I was in Hibbing, Minnesota, and I interviewed B.J. Rolfzen, who was Bob Dylan's 11th grade English teacher. As far as I was concerned, the main reason why Bob Dylan not only became a phenomenal songwriter and poet, and then in 2018 won the Nobel Prize for Literature was because of this man. It is myself and B.J. Rolfzen in his living room in Hibbing, Minnesota. B.J. reads from some of his favorite literature, poetry, some of his own poetry as well, and also talks about his greatest student, Mr. Bob Zimmerman, who became Bob Dylan. You will only see this on Wall and Power TV. Happy birthday, Mr. Dylan. All right, we're sitting here on a kind of a cloudy afternoon in Hibbing, Minnesota. And I'm sitting in the living room of a gentleman I had the chance to meet last summer when I played up here in Bennett Park. A legendary English teacher, known probably for the last several years as being one of a great influence on Bob Dylan, but as I've been doing some research, you've actually had quite an effect on hundreds and hundreds of people. I'm looking at this poem, BJ, and I know you have a great love of poetry. Maybe we could start this interview with you reciting the Carl Sandburg poem.
You want me to read this?
Yes.
You prefer this to any other?
Well, no. Do you have something else in there you'd like to read?
Okay, we can look at that later.
Yeah, I just thought that one opened up, and it's.
I read this down at the university.
Oh, you did?
For Dylan Days. Grass, the first one I read, and this is called Grass by Carl Sandburg, and this is how it reads: Pile the bodies high at Austerlitz and Waterloo, shovel them under, and let me work. I am the grass, I cover all. Pile them high at Gettysburg, pile them high at Ypres and Verdun, shovel them under, and let me work. I am the grass, I cover all. 2 years, 10 years. Passengers asked the conductor, what place is this? Where are we now? I am the grass, let me work.
There's something about hearing poetry as opposed to just reading it that really makes it come alive. You do such a great job at that.
Thank you.
Now, you went to school at St. John's, you said, in St. Cloud in Colorado.
Yes.
Studying English.
Yes.
And how did your love of the English language start?
I didn't start in high school, I know, because I was a poor student in high school. It's a difficult story that I have to tell about my background. It was during the Depression, you know. I know you can't use that as an excuse, but I never read a book in high school that I remember. You know, there were no books at home. My parents never read. We never got a newspaper. We never got a magazine. And the teachers weren't. I can't blame the teachers either. It's my own fault, I suppose. I didn't read. But when I got into the Navy, I remember distinctly. You know, once I got into the Navy, I looked around me, and it was obvious to me that if I was going to make my mark in the world, I had to begin to study, and begin to read, and begin to know things. And I was Mr. Fix-It in this block. Everybody called me about, could you fix my washing machine? Could you fix my toaster? Can you fix this? Can you fix that? And I fixed about everything they asked me to fix.
Do you see a relationship, BJ, between the mechanics of, say, a car or a toaster and the mechanics of language and poetry?
Well, it's just a matter of knowing, whatever you're doing, whether you're reading poetry or you're repairing an automobile. It's just knowing things, and that's where I was. I had to know. So when I got in the Navy, I got busy and I began to know. And I was in radio, electronics, and I was in 17 when I went in, and I was chief petty officer in about 4 years.
Where were you stationed?
I was in Hawaii. I was in South Pacific. I was in Saipan. I was in Tinian. I was in Guam. Various places around the Pacific.
And what years were that?
That was during the war.
Do you remember the first book that really made an impression on you?
I read a lot of Thomas Wolfe. I read all of his works. I read them twice and 3 times because I just love Thomas Wolfe. He's not my favorite writer anymore because I've grown up, but at one time in my life he was very important, and so that's why I read him. I read a lot of Russians. I read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. I read these kinds of things. I never stopped after the first 2 weeks in the Navy. It's been go, go, go. And now, of course, it's not go, go, go anymore because, I'm somewhat handicapped. I broke a hip, I had a stroke, I had open heart surgery, and here I am. But I keep going.
Well,
I do the best I can.
It's really a pleasure and an honor to be invited into your house. It was interesting, and we'll ask a gentleman that's sitting here to our left to come and say a few words. But when I knew I was going to come up to MC the Maria Muldaur show last night at the Hibbing High School Auditorium, I wanted to see if I could spend a little time with you and get some of your story, because I find you such a fascinating figure and an extraordinary gentleman, and those extraordinary gentlemen I find are just they're becoming few and far between in this violent and chaotic world we live in. And so I called a friend of mine who happened to be my old English teacher and one of my first guitar teachers, named Tom Moeller.
Oh, I know him.
Yes, and Tom said that you taught him and you were an influence on him like he was an influence on I. So maybe, Tom, if you could join us for a little bit and tell us a little bit about your experience with the great B.J. Rolfzen. That's Mr. Moeller.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is the way it should be. We're situated mentor, student.
Yeah.
Student, mentor.
Oh, for heaven's
Huh?
sakes. Oh, I wish I were on the other end,
Now, I had the good pleasure of having Bonnie as a teacher when I was here in 63 and 64 at junior college.
Okay.
And I told Paul earlier that I intended to be a Phi Ed major.
I know you did. You told me that a number of times.
But
and
upon taking your class, I switched gears.
I remember that. I remember distinctly when you told me that.
And that's a huge switch from Phi Ed
It
to
is.
English.
It is.
I've never looked back since.
You haven't, huh?
Never looked back. It's the best thing I've ever done.
Is that true, Tom?
Because that same love of literature which you just told Paul about, I got from you by osmosis.
Oh,
By
you
sitting in your class
Was that right?
and listening to you and saying, that's what I want to do.
And that's what you did.
That's what I did.
For how many years?
34 years.
And very successfully, too, I understand.
Well, it was a very enjoyable career because there are many wonderful students in Virginia, like Paul in the class of 74 over there.
Was that right? 74?
He was in my philosophy class, too. He had a
Yes.
philosophy elective in those days.
Philosophy, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was
You
a lot of
taught
fun.
philosophy.
Yes, I did.
I-
It was one of the electives over there.
Oh, that's pretty
Remember,
different.
you going to St. John's and I going to St. John's, we had to take all those philosophy classes.
Oh, yeah, I remember
So I
Father
went on and
Ernie.
pursued a major in that, too.
Father Ernie. Remember Father Ernie?
Father Ernie, I don't know if he was there when I was there.
Oh, he was a strict teacher.
Was he a philosophy teacher?
Yeah, he's a
over there?
philosophy teacher. Yeah.
He was.
Yeah, and he was vicious. But I don't know. I didn't learn very much philosophy from him. But I have a.
Well, didn't you learn that philosophy to seek pleasure and avoid pain from him? You must have if he was vicious.
Philosophy is a difficult area, At least I found it so. And I'm not a philosophy major. I got to tell you about my grandson.
He's majoring in philosophy.
Not only is he majoring in philosophy, but he's majoring in philosophy, chemistry, physics, mathematics.
Wow, brilliant kid.
That certainly is a panoramic
It
way
is.
of viewing education. When you
That's
go from
right.
one extreme to the next
That's
like
right.
that.
And he is one. He wants to know everything, about everything.
It's like Zen in the art of motorcycle repair. You were saying before you wanted to know about things. The classicist wants to know how they work, and the romanticist just wants to use them. And it sounds like your grandson combines both.
Yes, he does. And how was that expression go again? A classicist what? Wants to know?
Remember there was a popular book a couple of years back, several years back, called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle
Oh, yeah,
Repair.
yeah.
Motorcycle maintenance.
Maintenance.
Robert Persay,
Yeah.
I believe.
A guy wants, the classicist wants to take it apart and learn how it functions.
Okay.
And the romanticist simply wants to get on the motorcycle and
No,
ride
no,
it.
no.
I think it's best to have both.
I better, have both, yeah.
Yeah.
So Tom, what was, I know you were a very strict teacher, but strict to control the class because we were there to learn in 45-minute segments daily. How did Mr. Rolfzen run his class?
Mr. Rolfzen ran his class, and I think that's the best compliment you can pay someone, is that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. And I tried to run my class exactly like his. We taught from bell to bell.
Yes,
Remember, we always were prepared.
yes.
And we tried to infect kids with the same excitement about literature that we had.
Yes.
And I think if you manifest that sincerity, you don't have to worry about anything else, because discipline takes care of itself.
It's
And the person
automatic.
up there, it is, yeah.
You're not going to worry about discipline. You're about teaching these kids. And you never walk into class without being prepared.
Exactly.
It's an insult to the students to walk in there with a half-cocked, And you got to prepare yourself. And you do that by sitting at home in the evening looking at your books and correcting papers. It's not been sitting in some bar someplace. It's a full-time job, at least it was for me, and I'm sure it was for you, Tom.
And another thing I learned from Bonnie is be prepared like a professional and dress like a professional. We always wore suits.
I never
Now you
went
go
to,
into high school, people are
I
wearing
never went to
sweatshirts.
class the 35 years of my life without a tie on.
Yep.
My wife wouldn't let me out of the house unless I had a tie on.
And that's important. I still think it is.
That's important. It doesn't mean you're any better than anybody else, but you respect what you're doing, and you respect the students. You want to look like a professional and act like one and teach like one. That's what happens.
It's a composite package. You're
Yes, it
prepared,
is.
you act like one,
That's
you dress
right,
like
Tom.
one, and you conduct yourself with the decorum
That's right.
that is expected of a teacher.
Yes.
So anyway, it was nice chatting with you two gentlemen.
Yes.
I'll let you continue this interview.
Oh, well, nice to have you, Tom.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice to
As
see
always.
you. Nice to see
Paul?
you.
But it's a pleasure
When you
hearing
come
those
back with your
stories as
bike?
well.
When you can, I always pick him up on my motorcycle too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we've traveled the whole North Country here with he on the back listening to music from Pavarotti to the Beatles. We went the entire musical
Down
gamut.
all the way down to Floodwood.
All the way down the Floodwood. He never told me one ride we had, he was laid up for 2 weeks and
I
your back
was.
was so bad after that.
And I couldn't straighten up for 2 weeks,
See,
after sitting back there like
But while we
this.
were having
The
the
next-
ride, it was fun though.
The next time you do that, have somebody get a picture for me, please.
Yeah.
I'd love to
Oh,
see
my
that.
God.
We did that.
I remember that. I can remember that right, Tom. No more of that. I'm too
Okay,
old.
gentlemen, thank you very much for
All right,
inviting me
Tom.
into this.
Nice to see you. I was trying to teach the symposium down at the cities about poetry. Poetry is, I told them, was musical thought. Musical thought is a good definition of poetry. Because if you see deeply enough, you see musically, you see the harmony in the universe and life around you. And that's what you see in this poem, The Noiseless Spider.
And who wrote this poem?
This is written by, who wrote Leaves of Grass,
Walt Whitman.
Walt Whitman. Okay? You see something, but you see beyond that. You see what you see, but there's an interpretation of what you see. And the interpretation is how it applies to you. Okay? And that's what you see in this poem. A noiseless spider. A noiseless spider. I marked where on a promontory it stood, isolated. Marked how to explore the vast, vacant surrounding. It launched forth filament, 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 out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding them. And you, O my soul, where you stand, surrounded, detached, in measureless oceans of space, ceaselessly musing, venturing, throwing, seeking to spheres to connect them, till the bridge which you'll need to be formed, till the dactyl anchor hold, till the gossamer thread which you fling, catch somewhere, oh my soul.
Beautiful.
I love Walt Whitman. I did quite an extensive paper on Walt Whitman when I was in college because I enjoyed his poetry so much. And this is an example of his poetry. I love that poem, The Norwegian Spider. There's an example of musical thought. You look at the spider and you see beyond. Burns did the same thing to a mouse. You saw the mouse, you saw beyond the mouse. You saw something in yourself that you could see in the mouse. He was preparing for the winter, and you do the same damn thing. You prepare for the winter. So you have this in common. And that's what you see in poetry. You have to see that in life. When you read, you don't read in a vacuum, I used to tell the students. If you don't see yourself in what you read, close the book and go fishing, you know.
Who are some of your favorite poets that you've gone back to over the years?
Well, I like Frost, of course. Everybody likes him. And I like Wordsworth very, very much. He's my favorite poet. Well, Wordsworth. Of course, I read Shakespeare. I've read some Shakespeare. E. Cummings. Buffalo Bill. I like this. Buffalo Bill's defunct. Beautiful word, defunct. It's better than death. Buffalo Bill's defunct, who used to ride a water-smooth silver stallion and break 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pigeons just like that. Jesus, he was a handsome man. And what I want to know is, how do you like your blue-eyed boy, Mr. Dad? The way of all flesh.
Right. Well, and it reminds me of the great line in Dylan's song, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, where have you been, my blue-eyed son?
Yes.
And we're going back now to a man who's really had a profound influence on a young Bob Dylan. And what grade was Bob in when you taught him?
He was in 11th grade.
11th grade. And I know you've spoken about it before, but for the sake of this interview, what type of a student was he?
I had good students, and he was one of them. This was one of the students I had, a young lady, and this is a poem she wrote.
Great, let's hear it.
And she tried to capture the atmosphere in one of my classes.
Perfect.
In this poem. Okay. Think of it. Just think of it. The fool together in the storm. Think of it. He would retell the gusts of wind, the fierce and unforgiving circumstances that mighty air realized. Think of it, he said, and all the room stopped. Just think of it. We watched in awe as he clutched his unraveling an autographed copy of the immense journey to his chest, as though it were the last log of a swift river, something to save us all. The swooping hawk, coming down from a cloudless sky to seek its mate, the almost unimaginable symmetry of life. He leaned against the blackboard. He looked up at the ceiling and came back to us, covered with chalk, his hair on end from the glorious ordeal of literature. The characters who stepped out of words to haunt him. Faulkner Snopes, Sherwood Anderson's foolish narrator, and Scraps Almighty, and Joseph Conrad's keeping jungle vigil through silent, still waters. Basketball players, miners' daughters, and veterans returning from Vietnam left his classroom filled with the universe, so mysterious, so wondrous. The teacher, who had encountered it over and over, was yet astounded and covered with chalk. 20 years later, and more, in cities and towns all over the world, we come to Hemingway's clean lighted place, and thank God it is there that we were taught to recognize it, that we were taught to have the good sense to come in out of the cold.
For B.J. Rolfzen by
Yeah.
Kathleen Novak.
Yes, she wrote that for me.
Well, what a wonderful tribute.
Yes, it is.
What did it make you feel like when you saw, a young Robert Zimmerman, sounds like he was a very conscientious student, go out to make his way in the world and not only become known as a great folk singer, but also becoming one of America's great songwriters?
I remember, this is so long ago, but I remember, not because he's Bob Dylan, but because he's Robert Zimmerman. And I remember distinctly when he lived in a house where lives, and he called me up and he said, come on over, I want to talk to you. I remember distinctly. And he went to this house, I walked over, and he met me at the door, and there were a few people in the living room. He says, let's sit in this booth over here. There's a little booth over there, I think.
Right.
And breakfast booth.
Right.
And so we sat in there and we talked. We talked for some time because he was so excited about the way things going so well for him in the cities. It was not as difficult as you thought it would be to enter the world of music. And so he chatted for quite a long time. And a number of years later, I was in high school, college. I remember the room number was 233. I had a class in there. And he was sitting in the hallway. And I said, Rob, what the hell's going on? What are you doing here? And he said, well, I talked to him about some other things. And I should have invited him to the class, but I didn't. I had a class, so we talked for just about 10 minutes or so. And he told me about he's going to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. And I said, Jesus, that's wonderful, Robert. That's a wonderful thing. And I'm going to watch you. And he said, yeah, I'm going to be on a certain night, of course. And I said, I'll be watching you. Well, he never showed up, of course, because I guess Ed Sullivan didn't approve of the song he was going to sing.
Right, John Birch Blues
something
or something like that.
And so he never wrote. He never appeared. Then I saw him a couple of years ago over in the church over here. I think I told you that. And but he always had a compliment for me, And I'm not ashamed to tell you
what did he tell you?
He told me, Mr. Rolfzen, you taught me a lot.
Well, what did you, over the years, you've listened to his music and you've read his work and his poetry and his book, Chronicles, I imagine you read that.
Yeah.
And what do you think of your former student?
Human nature is so unpredictable that you can't predict. You just can't. At least I can't. I can sit in class and I can't predict, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do something. No. You teach them, and that's what you do, and what they do after that, that's their business.
But you've got a pretty wide panoramic view of American writers, and how do you think Dylan fits in?
I never compare this writer with another writer. I think that doesn't work.
Well, if you would do us one more favor, let's grab, you do such a great job with the spoken word. If there's something you'd like to read to take us out?
Those who seek for treasure must go alone at night, and when they find it, they must leave a little of their blood behind them. I used to tell my students that if you're going to learn, you're going to have to spill some of your blood. It's not easy. Those who have come to know the night country remembered even when the sun is shining.
Where's that line from?
I got that from the cover of a book by Lorne Isley. These are the times that try men's souls. Fate goes as fate must. Tom Moeller, Beowulf. Here's Carl Sandburg. Blindfolded bearers of the light destroy what they profess to enlighten. And that was a theme, or one of them, in Heart of Darkness. And one or two more. Go right ahead. I like this by Emerson. I think it's Emerson. The goal of a liberal education. A habit of mind is formed, which lasts throughout life, of which the attributes are equitableness, moderation, calmness, and wisdom. That's worth paying any price for. And in King Lear, we talked about his daughters, his problem he had with his children, and he finally says, how sharper than a serpent's tooth is an ungrateful child.
That's probably why I don't have any.
The mind of man is capable of anything because everything is in it. Conrad says, explore life with the fire of youth before the flame begins to flutter and is finally extinguished. And I'm on the end where it's being extinguished.
Well, BJ, this has been a wonderful afternoon. I really appreciate your time. Maybe we can do it again. I think you could encapsulate these in video sets to give to teachers and lovers of the language and future poets and present poets. But it's really been a wonderful time, and I want to thank you for inviting me in your house.
It's been a pleasure of mine to have you over here this afternoon and to see my friend again, Mr. Moeller. He's always up to no good with a camera.
Well, and if I get back up here to play, you'll have to come and see me like you did last summer. That was so enjoyable playing in Bennett Park.
I was just flabbergasted to see you stand up and play that guitar.
Oh, well, thank you.
Oh, my God. I used to play guitar. Did I ever tell you that?
No.
Yeah, I was aboard ship and I went to San Francisco and I went ashore and I said to myself, I'm going to play the guitar. Because there was a gentleman aboard ship, he used to sit there at night on the ship and everybody crowded around him and he played the guitar and I thought, hell, I could do that. So I bought myself a guitar and I brought it aboard ship and that lasted about 6 weeks. And I don't know what happened to the guitar, but I couldn't manage that. I couldn't.
Well, you made a lot of music with language, to paraphrase what you said earlier.
Couldn't make it. I just couldn't play it. The only instrument I played was the trombone, and that was in high school in the college band. And I played that very, very poorly. I was ashamed of myself to even think that I would play that. And but I love music. I enjoy good music, and even listen to Bob Dylan.
Well, wonderful. Well, we'll have to come over some other time. I'd like to extend this conversation, but I know you've had a busy weekend. But once again, thank you so much for inviting me into your home, BJ. It was a real pleasure. And Tom Moeller, thank you so much as well.
It's been a pleasure of mine.
Thanks for watching Wall of Power TV. This is your host, Paul Metsa. I also want to thank my English teacher, Mr. Tom Moeller, who taped the interview with his English teacher, Mr. B.J. Rolfzen, in 2007 at B.J.'s home in Hibbing, Minnesota. B.J., of course, was also Bob Dylan's 11th grade English teacher. It was exclusive. It was a great afternoon, and we are happy to tell you, you can only see it on Wall of Power TV. More great shows coming up, same time, same station next week. Stick around. Let's save you some.